All right, so I stumbled across this YouTube video bright and early this morning called Jordan Peterson, Insane Correlation Between Prevalence of Infectious Diseases and Authoritarian Belief. So I got this great idea that I'm going to do commentary. I'm going to record the screen live, and I may stop and give commentary throughout. This is going to be epic. I get the feeling, and I follow Jordan Peterson, so let's go ahead and do just that. All right, we've got the entire screen recording. I am expanding and going live now.
The Nazis were, first of all, they're German, and the Germans are a conscientious people, so to speak. You know, they have a very advanced industrial society. Their engineering is very precise. To what degree that's a national trait, God only knows. To what degree that's a consequence of sociological pressure. We don't understand anything about those sorts of things. But Hitler was absolutely obsessed with purity and with willpower, and those things go together. So orderly people seem to be very enamored of their own willpower, or something like that. They sort of worship it as the top god, so to speak. And like anorexic people tend to be very orderly, and they get disgusted. I think anorexia is a disorder of disgust. Anorexic girls, they get completely disgusted by their own bodies. You know, and think about that. That's a very tight line, because there's any number of disgusting things about bodies.
And one has to wonder if that comes from some kind of subversive programming, some kind of repercussion of corporate programming that exists, by which we end up being programmed to not only see others maybe in disgust, but see yourself in a way that others may view others in a resentful way, if that makes sense, or in a judgmental way. And this would have to do with authoritarian order, because in order to have that authoritarian order, perhaps he will go into this, where you have to have this type of programming.
And you have to attend to that, because if you don't, then you end up contaminated in a variety of ways. You know, you can catch a sexual disease, for example, or you can just catch a disease, or you can develop an infection, or any number of things that will take you down. You know, so it's very difficult for human beings to get the calibration right with regards to, you know, their own bodies and their feeling about their bodies, and the fact that you also have to keep the damn thing clean and organized, and otherwise, you know, all hell breaks loose. And it's no joke. Before Hitler, you know, started the concentration camps and went after things in a big way, he's very, very concerned with the hygiene of the German people. You know, and he did things like his first policy implementations were tuberculosis screening. He had people go around in vans and X-ray everyone to try to get rid of tuberculosis. It's like, yeah, you know, so let's get rid of tuberculosis. And then they started cleaning up the factory, so they, you know, get rid of the bugs and the rats and sweep them all out and plant flowers out front. It was like a beautification campaign, and they used Zyklon B to do that. And Zyklon B was the gas that was used in the concentration camps. It's like, that's quite interesting, that movement from insects and rats to human beings, and that there was an intermediary there, which seemed to be mental hospitals, because the next thing they did was go and clean up the people that the Nazis, Hitler in particular, but the Nazis in general, felt were inferior or contemptible or something like that. And like contempt and disgust seem to go very tightly together.
I'm going to stop it here, because what he appears to be describing is the steady deterioration of our city infrastructure and the ability to keep these large population centers clean. When I go into downtown Boston, it's a beautiful city, and it's like you can romanticize it to no extent. But if you go into the public transportation, the MBTA, it smells like urine more and more every day. That's no exaggeration. And you still have a lot of drug addicted people, a lot of overdoses, a lot of these things are prevalent in these public areas. And so one has to wonder at some point, with inflation, with a lot of these things going on, where we're going to see more inequity. This is going to lead to less sanitary environments. And if you have an authoritarian state that has used programming to create some kind of order, and you create this mass hallucination of everything being dirty and filthy while simultaneously creating this undergrowth of nastiness and urine infested subways and railways, whatever ways. Where does this lead to? Will we rely on government to have to come in and implement policy? Policy is what has degraded the value of the middle class and working class investment via taxpayer dollars. Keep that in mind. The financialization of our legislative body.
Contempt. That's a vicious emotion. So, like, if you're in a relationship with somebody, a close relationship, and they start to become contemptuous of you,
contemptuous.
you can tell that because they roll their eye.
People wearing masks, not wearing masks, blaming people for infectious disease. Vaccination, no vaccination. Sound familiar?
The probability that you're going to divorce them or separate from them is extraordinary.
It's not a vaccine, by the way.
Contempt is a very corrosive emotion. And anyway, so, you know, the transformation and purity campaign of Hitler just extended and extended and extended and extended and extended. And, you know, God only knows where it would have ended. And I also think that's why he was a worshiper of fire. You know, because fire is a purifying substance. And the Nazis really used fire as a symbol of their movement, because Hitler would have these massive nighttime political rallies, you know, with 150,000 people all put in perfect squares, you know, with this massive background of fire and light. And, you know, and it all seems to boil down to the fact that he...
Kind of sounds like a spectacle, like when you have an inauguration, for example. And this isn't just limited to the last one, but the last one specifically. It didn't look like Lady Gaga was performing at Joe Biden's inauguration. It looked like Joe Biden was performing at Lady Gaga's global inauguration or global event and concert. Didn't it? It kind of felt like that. It was a bit produced, yeah? As all inaugurations are. But the last one seemed a bit much.
He was extraordinarily disgust sensitive, and that became a cardinal element of his political platform, and then that was associated with orderliness, and that, you know, you could track it all the way down to the biology. And there was a paper published in PLOS ONE, which I should really put on the website, about a year ago. Unfortunately, I don't remember who published it, but they were looking at, you know, let's say I assessed your political attitudes. I could do that, say, with an authoritarian scale, authoritarian belief scale, because authoritarianism has been studied quite a bit since the end of World War II. Nobody really knew what to do with it in relationship to personality. Doesn't matter. You can assess it, you know, with a reasonable degree of accuracy. These people they did two things. They did a cross-country survey and then within-country surveys. So you imagine if you were looking at a phenomena, you could look at the country level, U.S. versus Canada, or you could go into the U.S. and then you could look at a state level. And it's nice to do the analysis at both levels to see if it replicates itself across the two different conceptual strata. And what they found is mind-boggling. It's Nobel Prize winning stuff as far as I'm concerned, is that the correlation between the prevalence of infectious disease in a locale...
Didn't they give Barack Obama a Nobel Peace Prize?
And the degree to which authoritarian beliefs were held in that locale was about 0.7. It's like you never see that in the social sciences. That's higher than the correlation between IQ and grades, which is about as good as we ever get in terms of prediction. So it's like, really? It's that high?
Pause for ad.
On March 16th, 2021, 6 women were among the victims.
You know, and one of the things that implies is that one of the ways to get rid of right-wing authoritarian attitudes, assuming that you want to get rid of such things, is through public health. You know, it could easily be that the reason that we're all tilted fairly hard to the center and even to the left is that everybody's clean. You know, we've got functioning sanitation. It's like, oh, don't have to worry about that anymore. So, and believe me, like, people used to have to worry about that before there were antibiotics. It's like, you get an infection, man, you're dead. And that's on its way back, by the way, because we keep using antibiotics for everything under the sun, which is very, very, very stupid. Anyways, so I gave you all that back.
Pharmaceutical, medical industry, pharmaceutical companies. Does that sound familiar?
Background, because, you know, it's a tangled mess, the authoritarian personality issue. There's this.
By the way, Geert von den Bosch was saying this. If you take the vaccine, it's going to create a vector by which a new variant can emerge and devastate a population. You keep taking antibiotics, you're creating something similar, right? They become less effective. The bad things, the bad guys, the bad germs become more resistant, right? Jordan Peterson's the man, I'm telling you.
The sociological element to it, which is the disease element, and then there's the existential element that we've talked about in detail, where there seems to be also something about people's unwillingness to stand up for themselves and develop their own beliefs and adhere to the truth and to adopt authoritarian, extremely rigid authoritarian belief systems and then go persecute people for them. But we don't know how to separate all those things out. But I thought
Now, Jordan Peterson mentions becoming an individual so as to self-reflect, clean up your own house, make your own bed, those type of things, in order to be able to have independent thought, removing yourself from what they are calling some order that you recognize as being a corrupt order. This is authoritarianism. This is what leads the independent. All right, to separate themselves and say, hey, I call BS on this. I see that. I see what's going on. You're using intuition and all of these things. Getting back.
I would read you some things that were written both by Solzhenitsyn and by Frankl about A, the concentration camps in Germany, because Frankl was a concentration camp survivor, and B, the concentration camps in the Soviet Union, because Solzhenitsyn was a concentration camp survivor. He was a rather fortunate concentration camp inmate insofar as there is such a thing, because he had some specialized knowledge that made him sufficiently valuable not to starve to death. So here's one of Solzhenitsyn's descriptions of one of his experiences, or that some first-hand observer told him, because when he wrote the Gulag Archipelago, he wrote a lot about his own experiences, but he also wrote a lot about the experiences that other people had related to him while he was in the camps. So one of the people he met told how executions were carried out at ADAC, which is a work camp, a destructive labor camp on the Pechora River. They would take the opposition
which, by the way, in the United States of America under Donald Trump, federal laws were changed and the way in which we execute prisoners was changed and they expanded it. I highly recommend looking into it.
Members, so these were people who weren't communists. A lot of people who got thrown in the Gulag prisons in the Soviet Union were basically political prisoners, right? You weren't a staunch communist, or you'd been turned in for political, what would you call it?
Does that sound
treason,
familiar?
By a neighbor who really wanted
January 6th
so
insurrection.
you get hauled off to the concentration camp, and then your neighbor would get your apartments. Very pretty arrangement for everyone concerned. So the gulags were full of political prisoners. They were also full of normal criminals, murderers, rapists, thieves, and those guys basically ran the camps. And because the Stalinists thought that murderers, rapists, and thieves, that they were, what would you call those? You could rehabilitate them because they were actually victims of an unjust class structure. So, hypothetically, you could save them. Whereas if you had rich parents, or maybe your parents owned farmland, or maybe they...
Or what's another word for that? Deprogram or reprogram? Have you heard Joe Biden use that? I have.
Just had a bloody house, God only knows, then you were a socially suspect element because you came from the bourgeoisie and not the proletariat. So you got thrown in jail alongside the murderers and the rapists and the thieves. And
you are the bourgeoisie.
Morally superior to you, which is, something that only a bloody communist could think through and come to that conclusion. It's mind-boggling. So, anyways,
indeed, JP.
The camps was, political murder, essentially. And so this is what Social Roots is talking about in this particular case.
And here we are. And here we are, folks. And here we are. Everybody stay motivated, stay hydrated. And God bless, stay independent.